It stood at the end of a gravel road no one had driven on for years. Towering and still, the Mendelssohn house loomed from behind iron-black trees, its gabled rooftop shrouded by layers of persistent fog. Children in Ashmore Hill were told never to go near it. Their parents, even their grandparents, never spoke its name out loud. And yet, there it was, waiting. Eleanor Black had seen hundreds of houses in her years of freelance investigation, most with disappointing legends and tired superstitions. But something about Ashmore Hill had a weight she hadn't felt before. Perhaps it was the silence, not the kind filled with tension, but a silence so deep it made her question if sound itself existed there. The old caretaker, Mr. Cranley, had handed her the keys without a word. Just a nod, a turn of the wrist and a quick shuffle back to his pickup truck. As she approached the front door, the hinges groaned even before her hand touched the knob. It was as if the house knew she was coming. The interior was preserved like a photograph left in a sealed trunk. Dust swirled in slow, sleepy columns. Faded paintings hung crookedly above mantels. The wooden floor creaked under her boots, but not in protest, almost in recognition. Eleanor moved carefully, every step deliberate, eyes scanning. She wasn't just here to write about haunted homes. She was here because 3 months ago a letter arrived. No name, no return address, just a note. Come to Ashmore Hill. Every floorboard hides a name. You must listen. She hadn't told anyone she was going. There was no team, no cameraman, no assistant, just her notebook, and a small leather-bound journal that once belonged to her mother. Before we uncover the first hidden name beneath the Mendelssohn floorboards, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting true stories, because what you're about to hear has never been written before. The living room, if it could still be called that, was dimly lit by the dying sun behind moth-eaten curtains. There were portraits above the fireplace, stern faces, all bearing the same sharp cheekbones and intense eyes. The Mendelsons, a family that had once owned most of Ashmore's land during the late 1800s. Now they were no more than whispers, and this house, their last monument. She moved toward the hallway, her boots tapping lightly on the polished maple floors. A cold draft licked her ankles. The boards beneath her feet groaned again, but one plank near the base of the staircase let out a different sound, short, strained, almost like a breath. Eleanor paused, knelt. Her fingers traced the edges of the board. It wasn't loose, but it bulged slightly, as if resisting. She pressed down harder and felt something shift below. Reaching for her flashlight, she aimed it across the grain. That's when she saw it. A name, burned faintly into the wood, half hidden by polish and grime. Caleb, 1891. She leaned closer, heartbeat steady but curious. Caleb who? Why that year? She stood up slowly and turned toward the fireplace. Something in the painting had changed. She stepped closer. The second man from the left, the one who had looked directly at her when she entered, now had his head turned slightly to the side. She blinked. No, surely she imagined it. Still, she noted it. Night was falling. The house seemed to exhale with the sun's retreat. She could stay at the motel in town, but she knew she wouldn't. Not tonight. Eleanor pulled out her journal and scribbled the name. One name on one floorboard. She had no way of knowing there were dozens more, each one a story, each one a secret, and every single one waiting for her. The night air inside the house felt thicker now, as if it had absorbed the breath of every soul that had ever stepped foot within its walls. Eleanor lay awake on a tattered chaise lounge in the drawing room, her coat pulled tightly around her. The wind outside howled, but what unsettled her more was the occasional creak of floorboards above, measured, deliberate, as though someone walked the upper hall with purpose. At dawn she rose without having truly slept. The etched name, Caleb, 1891, still pulsed in her mind. She ran her fingers over it again, memorizing the grooves, the way the burn marks curled at the edges. She knew it wasn't a craftsman's work. It was too careful, too intentional. Someone had taken time to make it last. In town, the streets were just beginning to stir. Fog clung low to the ground, swallowing bootsteps. Eleanor made her way into the diner, its chipped tile floors and chrome stools reminiscent of a world that didn't exist anymore. A few heads turned, none welcoming. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 70s, her eyes sharp as frost. Her name tag read Ida. "You're from the house," she said before Eleanor even opened her mouth. Eleanor sat. "I'm a writer, looking into local histories." Ida didn't blink. "There's history and there's warning. Which are you after?" Eleanor hesitated. "Do you know the name Caleb, dated 1891? The room seemed to pause. The spoon in the coffee cup Ida had been stirring stopped mid-circle. "That's not a name you say aloud." "Why?" Ida leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because the house listens." "Always has." Eleanor studied her. "You've been there." "I grew up 2 fields away, used to hear it calling. My brother dared me to touch the front gate once. I did. Next morning he was gone." "Gone?" Eleanor asked, stunned. "No sign, no scream, just his jacket folded by the post. Everyone said he ran off, but he was 12. Did they search the house?" "Back then? No one dared go inside. But my mother, she knew. She said the Mendelsons never buried their dead, not properly." Eleanor's skin prickled. "What do you mean?" Ida's eyes darkened. "Every board in that house remembers. The names, the cries, the breath. The wood was taken from a place that should have burned to ashes, but they saved it, used it to build something worse." Eleanor tried to speak but found herself silent. Ida continued, "You keep scratching at those floors, girl. You won't just find names, you'll find what they left behind. Why would someone carve a name? To be remembered, or maybe to warn the next fool who walks across their grave." Eleanor scribbled notes in her journal, though her hand shook slightly. "Do you know more names?" Ida didn't answer. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a folded napkin. Inside, an old photo, sepia-toned, water-damaged, of 5 children standing in front of the Mendelssohn house. At the center, a boy with a toothy grin and suspenders. Someone had circled him in pencil. "My brother, Jacob." That was taken 2 days before he vanished. Eleanor's eyes locked onto the child. The same features. The same haunting curiosity. "He's not the only one," Ida whispered. "They say if you stay too long you begin to hear them. Not voices, not footsteps, just the wood, whispering." Outside, the morning sun broke through the fog, casting pale gold over the storefronts, but it didn't warm the chill now lodged in Eleanor's spine. Back at the house, she stood again over the board that bore Caleb's name. She pressed her palm against it. The grain felt warm, not from the sun, but from something beneath. That night, she slept upstairs. She counted 5 creaks before midnight. Then silence. And just before sleep took her, she thought she heard it. Faint, beneath the floorboards. A name being whispered back. The library in Ashmore Hills Town Hall was a forgotten corner of the world. Dusty records filled mismatched filing cabinets, and the scent of mildew clung to the walls like stubborn memories. Eleanor, wrapped in her coat and curiosity, pulled open the oldest volume marked Landowners, 1870-1900. Charles Alton Mendelssohn. The name leapt from the page with an unnatural sharpness. It was scrawled across deeds, permits, tax records, pages that showed a man with deep pockets and deeper ambitions. By 1872, he owned over 70 acres of Ashmore's eastern hills. But it wasn't land for farming. It was isolation. That much was clear. A clipping from the Ashmore Sentinel, dated March 1874, gave the first glimpse into the man himself. Mr. Mendelssohn returns from the north with materials to begin construction on his private residence. Local hands report odd shipments, scorched timbers, rusted nails, and heavy stones from an asylum destroyed by fire last winter. Town officials declined to comment. Eleanor reread the paragraph. An asylum, she flipped back to 1869. Another article. Tragedy struck the North Haven Sanatorium as flames consumed the structure. 32 patients perished. Wood salvaged was sold to private bidders. She leaned back, eyes wide. The floor beneath her had come from a place where dozens had died in anguish. Back at the house, she studied the walls more intently. Behind the peeling wallpaper, beneath the polish, she could sense it. Something wrong in the very bones of the structure. Charles Mendelssohn hadn't been a recluse from the beginning. In the late 1860s, he was known as a visionary industrialist. He had patented a design for automated weaving machines, amassing fortune during the textile boom. But then came the collapse of his mill in Manchester, followed by the sudden death of his wife, Margaret. The obituary said it was influenza. Rumours whispered otherwise. By 1871, Charles had vanished from public life. Then came the house. Built with fire-touched wood, far from any prying eyes where the hills muffled screams and swallowed questions. But he wasn't alone. Records showed he remarried in 1875. Florence Lyle, 20 years his junior. No marriage certificate filed, no public announcement, just her name appearing suddenly beside his in-land ownership documents. Eleanor found only one photograph of them together, cracked and half-faded. Charles, with those piercing eyes and immaculately groomed beard, stood stiff beside a small, wary woman. Florence's expression was unreadable, but her hands were clenched into fists. There were no birth certificates, but school rosters listed children bearing the Mendelssohn name, Harold, Edith, Jonathan. Yet their names disappeared after a few years. No graduation records, no marriage licenses. Only one grave, Harold Mendelssohn, died 1885, age 7. No cause listed. And then came the rumours. In a private journal kept by Reverend Thomas Morrow, dated 1886, Eleanor found this chilling entry. Another child gone. The Mendelssohns said she was sent to relatives in Ohio, but I buried her myself, alone, with no service, no name. Florence wept. Charles stood silent. The more Eleanor uncovered, the more the house seemed to lean into her. The floors moaned louder when she passed. The portraits watched more intently. And yet she wasn't afraid. She was driven. Charles Mendelssohn's legacy wasn't just land or industry. It was silence, vanishing names, a house built from ash, designed to remember what the world refused to. That night, she lit a single candle in the drawing room and wrote the names she had found. Charles, Florence, Harold, Caleb. Others whispered through the records, half-formed and fading. As the flame flickered, Eleanor whispered into the room, "How many of you were there?" The candle sputtered. She added a note beside Caleb's name. First name on the floorboard, not the last. Then, for a moment, just beneath the old rug by the piano, she thought she heard it again. Another whisper. Another name. The morning after the candle had sputtered out, Eleanor pulled back the rug by the piano. Her fingers brushed against another irregularity in the wood. Not a splinter, not a crack, something deeper. She leaned in, heart pounding, and uncovered the second name. Eliza, 1903. 2 names now, 2 dates, both carved with care, burned into the fibers of the floor as if to defy time. Eleanor stood and looked around the room. The light filtered through the lace curtains in narrow beams. Dust drifted silently, indifferent to the past. She took a breath and began a slow circuit of the house, crawling when needed, checking every inch of exposed floorboard. By noon she had found 6 names, all different, all followed by years ranging between 1887 and 1911. Caleb, 1891. Eliza, 1903. Miriam, 1896. Thomas, 1908. Ruth, 1899. Henry, 1911. None were Mendelssohns. She opened her journal and wrote them carefully, each one like a prayer or a warning. The symmetry of the years disturbed her. Every 2 or 3 years, another name, another child. The drawing room, the nursery upstairs, even the hallway leading to the cellar, all bore a single name hidden within them. No last names. Just first names, as if whoever carved them had no need to distinguish them from others, as if they weren't meant to be remembered beyond that. Eleanor returned to the town library. She dug through census records, missing person reports, school rosters. She began cross-referencing years and ages. That's when the pattern struck her. Every name corresponded with a child between 6 and 10 years old, all residents of Ashmore or neighbouring towns, all reported missing within 2 weeks of the year, inscribed beside their name. None were ever found, none linked to each other in public record. No connections, no suspicions raised, at least not in print. The deeper she searched, the more a chilling rhythm emerged. And yet, none of these disappearances had ever made the state papers. No criminal investigation was ever opened. It was as if someone had taken great care to let them fade. Eleanor returned to the house with renewed urgency. She ventured into the narrow upstairs corridor, the one with warped boards and a faint smell of lavender. Halfway down the hall, she noticed a panel near the baseboard that bulged slightly. She knelt and pried it open with a hairpin. Inside was a tiny cavity, no larger than a shoebox. Inside, a yellowed envelope, tied with twine. She untied it slowly, fingers trembling. A child's drawing fell out first, crayon and charcoal. A crude figure, a girl with red hair standing in front of the house. A black scribble loomed behind her. Beneath the image, in faint, shaky script, Miriam, age 7. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. She unfolded the paper tucked behind it. A letter, or part of one. "They said I was lucky to be chosen, that the house would keep me safe, but it's not true. The floor is cold and the walls move at night. I miss Mama. I want to go home." No signature. Eleanor sat there, hands shaking. This wasn't myth, this was real. A child had written this, Miriam, but why? Why carve names? Why hide letters? And who had done it? That night, Eleanor sat in the nursery. She placed the drawing in front of her, the letter beside it. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in an uneven rhythm. At midnight, the tapping stopped. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then the floor groaned beneath her, slowly, deliberately. She didn't move. A creak to the left, then right, as if something or someone was circling her. Her eyes darted toward the names in her notebook. She mouthed them, one by one, like a litany. As she whispered Miriam's name, a low whimper echoed from the far wall. She froze. Then, in the quiet, came a voice. Small, hesitant, no more than breath. "Please, don't forget me." The next morning, Eleanor awoke on the nursery floor, her limbs stiff and cold, the letter still clutched in her hand. For a moment, she wondered if the voice she'd heard had been a dream, but the note on the wall beside her hadn't been there the night before. Written in chalk, in jagged, childlike lines, "We are still here." She stood quickly, heart pounding, and ran her fingers over the message. The chalk crumbled at her touch, as if resisting erasure. There were no chimneys on the second floor, no vents or ducts to explain the sounds. But the walls, yes, the walls felt strange, thick in some places, hollow in others. She moved down the hall with her knuckles pressed to the plaster, tapping. The nursery wall to the east gave off a deeper echo, hollow. She fetched a hammer from the tool bin near the cellar. One precise strike near the baseboard. Plaster cracked like an eggshell, revealing dark-aged wood behind it. She widened the hole with careful strikes. Then, peering inside, her breath caught. A narrow crawl space, less than 2 feet wide, and within it scattered bones. Tiny bones. No coffins, no wrappings, just brittle remnants, too small to be adult. Eleanor recoiled, her stomach turning. She sat on the floor, trying to catch her breath. The world had tilted. She didn't know how many there were, she didn't want to count. And yet, she knew what this meant. The names weren't just memories, they were graves. She sealed the hole as best she could, tears welling but not falling. Then she sat, cross-legged, and opened the journal her mother had left her. She'd always wondered why her mother refused to speak of her own childhood, why she flinched at the sound of creaking wood. On the back page, something new, something Eleanor had never noticed. A list of names, first names, 6 of them. She compared them to her notebook. 4 matched. One name at the bottom, Miriam, circled in red ink. She stared, coldness creeping up her spine. Had her mother known, or worse, had she been part of it? No. Her mother had left Ashmore at 17, never returned, never spoke of it, always checking locks, always telling Eleanor to trust silence, not noise. Back in the nursery, Eleanor found a loose board behind the wardrobe. She pried it open, revealing a small alcove. Inside, a single porcelain doll, its dress torn and stained, one eye missing. Sewn into its bodice, a tag. Miriam. She clutched it to her chest. The doll was warm. The wood behind the alcove gave a sudden groan. She stepped back. A voice closer now from the wall. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she whispered. "You're not." From then on, the house shifted. The floors moaned longer, the walls sighed with her steps. Eleanor didn't run, she didn't scream. She wrote, she catalogued, she listened. Each night she lit a candle and spoke their names aloud. The voices grew clearer. Some laughed, some wept, some simply breathed. On the third night, she found another letter. This one not from a child, but from someone older, inked in cursive, faded by time, hidden beneath a plank in the attic. He said they'd be safe here, that the world outside was too cruel. I believed him. I helped him. But when I saw the first one wither in the walls, I knew I'd damned them. I begged him to stop. He smiled. Said we were building something eternal. It was signed FM. Eleanor underlined the initials in her notebook. A new thread. A new question. And that night, in the same crawl space, she found a child's shoe with the name Nora stitched inside. No year this time, no mark, just the name, as if the house had stopped keeping track. Eleanor waited outside the diner until the last patron left. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside, carrying a leather satchel filled with records, photos, and bones of questions. Ida stood at the counter, drying a chipped mug. "I need answers," Eleanor said. Ida didn't look up. "You already have some. I have names, letters, a crawl space full of remains, but not the truth." Ida sighed and motioned toward the corner booth. They sat in silence for a moment, the old clock ticking overhead like a heartbeat. "I was born in Ashmore," Ida began, her voice dry and even. "My mother died giving birth to my sister, Lena. Our father, he was never in the picture. We were taken in by a woman named Florence. She lived in that house, the Mendelssohn house." Eleanor blinked. "You lived there?" "Until I was 13. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them on the table. "We weren't adopted, not in any legal way. Florence took in orphans. Children nobody claimed. The town didn't ask questions because she wore the Mendelssohn name. Because her husband had built the church roof and paid for the town's well. Charles Mendelssohn." Eleanor leaned forward. "What happened in that house, Ida?" Ida's gaze hardened. "At first it was warm. We had meals, books, music. Florence was quiet but kind. She told us the world outside was cruel, that we were safe there, but the rules changed. Slowly." "What kind of rules?" "No windows after sundown. No speaking unless spoken to. Never open the cellar door. And above all, never step on the floorboards near the piano after dark." Eleanor's breath caught. "One by one," Ida continued, "children disappeared. We were told they'd gone to families in the north, but they didn't leave with bags. No goodbyes, just silence. And Florence, she started praying more, whispering to the walls." "Did she know?" Eleanor asked. Ida hesitated. "Yes, I think she did. But she wasn't the one choosing. Charles did that. But he was dead by then." Ida nodded. "He died when I was 8, but his presence never left. Florence said he lived through the house now, that his promises had to be kept. At first, I thought she was mad. But then I started hearing things, breathing behind the walls. Whispers in the floor." Eleanor placed the drawing she'd found, Miriam's sketch of the house, on the table. "Do you remember her?" Ida's eyes filled. "Miriam, yes, sweet, gentle girl. She was the last before I ran. I saw her standing by the stairs, holding that doll. That night I heard her scream once, just once. And Lena." Ida's hands clenched. "She was still there when I left. I told her to come with me, but she was too scared. I promised I'd come back." Her voice cracked. "I never did." Silence stretched between them. The clock ticked on. Outside, wind swept dead leaves across the sidewalk. Eleanor pulled the photograph from her satchel, the one with the circled boy. "Jacob was your brother?" Ida nodded. "He dared me to touch the gate when we were little. I didn't know he'd vanished that night. I always thought it was punishment, for touching the house." Eleanor placed the list of names on the table. "Some of them are in the walls. Their names are in the floor. Do you know why? No one was supposed to know they ever existed, but Florence, she remembered them. She carved them herself. After each one vanished, I saw her do it. She said it was the only way to keep their souls from being erased. Eleanor stared, stunned. So she tried to protect them. She tried, Ida said, but she also stayed. She let it continue. Do you want to go back? Eleanor asked. Ida looked down at her hands. I can't, but you can. What would I even do? Ida's voice was steady. Find Lena, or what's left of her. And tell her I never stopped trying. Eleanor returned to the house with Ida's words echoing in her ears. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe. She moved with purpose now, no longer just an observer, but a witness, a keeper of memory. She knew where to look next. The drawing room had always felt like the heart of the house, but it wasn't the center. That distinction belonged to the room off the eastern corridor, the one no map included. There was no door, only a wall, flush and unbroken, until you pressed just right. Her fingers traced along the wallpaper until she felt the seam, a click, a shift in air pressure. The wall groaned and gave way, revealing a narrow passage. She stepped inside. It was a chamber of stillness, no windows, no light, and no sound, not even the ticking of her own watch. The silence was absolute, oppressive, like wool over the ears of the world. Her breath, though visible in the cold, made no sound. The walls were bare, save for one corner where dust refused to settle. She knelt and rubbed the surface. Beneath the grime initials, F.M. Florence Mendelssohn. Eleanor set her lantern down and scanned the room. No furniture, no remnants of life, except the floor. It was cleaner here, as if someone had recently wiped it down. She ran her fingers over the boards. They were smoother, almost soft. Then, near the center, she found a faint ridge. She pried it open with her penknife. Inside, wrapped in a cloth stiff with age, was a letter. Its ink was smeared in places, but most of it remained legible. Dated December 17th, 1906. Addressed to no one, perhaps to anyone who might one day listen. I can no longer bear the silence. Charles said the house would be our legacy, a place of purity and order, but it has become a tomb. I see them, hear them, feel their breath behind the walls. I tried to stop him. I failed. Eleanor's hands trembled. He promised salvation, said the wood would remember what the world would forget, that the names must never be spoken aloud, lest they stir. But I could not let them vanish. I burned them into the floor, each one, a rebellion in secret. If you find this, know that I loved them. Even as I failed them, know that I tried. The letter ended without a signature, just a single line beneath. Forgive me. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her journal. As she stood, the floor beneath her shifted. Not a creak, but a release. A panel lifted on its own. She bent down and saw something tucked inside, a lock of hair, tied with red ribbon. And beneath it, another name. Lena, 1907. Eleanor sat back, stunned. Ida's sister. She closed her eyes, tried to picture the girl. Alone, afraid, waiting for someone who never returned. The weight of it bore down on her, and the silence deepened. But then, faint and fragile, like wind beneath stone, she heard it. A hum. It was soft, childlike, a lullaby barely formed. Eleanor followed it with her breath held. It wasn't coming from the walls this time, it was inside her, or around her. She couldn't tell. The silence cracked. In that moment she understood. This room hadn't been built to contain screams. It was built to hide confessions. Eleanor whispered Lena's name aloud. The floor responded with a sigh. Not of menace, but relief. She gathered her things and left the room, closing it behind her. The house didn't resist. Back in the drawing room, she opened her notebook and added the latest name, 15 in total now, and for the first time she felt the list nearing its end. But it wasn't over. Not until the last voice had been heard. Not until the truth stood where silence had reigned. The records were harder to find now. Official histories had been sanitized, made sterile and clean. But in the courthouse basement, buried beneath tax ledgers and property disputes, Eleanor found the collection labeled Personal Correspondence, 1873-1881. Most of it was mundane, business letters, contracts, invitations. But one folder bore a different stamp, Confiscated Materials, North Haven Inquiry. Inside were 21 pages of letters written by Charles Mendelssohn himself. She read them one by one, in silence, under the flickering light of a failing bulb. The earliest letters were eloquent, controlled, filled with intellectual ambition. He wrote of architecture, legacy, and purification through isolation. He believed the world outside had grown corrupt, that the house on Ashmore Hill would be a new Eden. But the tone shifted by 1875. They don't understand. The city's filth is in their blood and it poisons the soul. These children, they are vessels, clean slates. I can build them into something better. Eleanor shivered. A year later, another entry. Florence weeps too often, she doesn't see the purpose. But I see it clearly now. It's in their eyes when they first arrive, frightened, directionless, and then, within weeks, I bring order. They sleep when told, eat what is given, their minds malleable, their wills erased. The letters became shorter, more erratic, scribbled margins, crossed-out phrases, repetitions. The house listens. The house breathes. They remember because I made them remember. The most damning letter was dated March 17, 1879. Florence threatened to go to the priest. She says they're dying, but it isn't death, it's rebirth. I silence her screams with lavender and prayer. When the blood dries, the walls keep the secret. Eleanor stopped reading. Her hands were ice. Charles hadn't simply built a home, he'd crafted a system. The orphaned, the unwanted, the poor, they were never meant to be saved. They were the raw material for his private ideal. But something had gone wrong. Even in his own letters, hints of fear began to appear. Miriam watches me, always. Her eyes follow even when I sleep. I carved her name to seal her in. Ruth speaks in dreams. She says she's still cold. The line between method and madness had vanished. In a final note written on torn paper without salutation or date, the wood remembers too much. The screams have soaked into the beams. If I am gone, burn the foundation, salt the earth, or it will never be over. Eleanor folded the pages carefully and placed them in her bag. Back at the house, she wandered the halls with a new kind of reverence, not for what had been, but for what had endured. The whispers, the creaks, the way shadows pooled where they shouldn't. It wasn't imagination. It was history refusing to forget. She stood in the dining room, the long table still covered in a faded linen cloth. She placed her hand on the chair at the head. Charles had sat there. Had watched the children eat, their spines straight, their mouths silent. Had dreamed of shaping minds while discarding souls. The walls of the house weren't haunted by ghosts. They were haunted by discipline, by cold, methodical control masked as vision. That night, Eleanor didn't light a candle. She sat in the dark, listening, and in the stillness, she finally understood. The house wasn't evil. But it had been taught to obey, trained by Charles to record, to correct, to hold, and now, with his voice long gone, it remembered what he had made it do. Eleanor had seen enough to know Charles Mendelssohn hadn't worked alone, not entirely. A structure like this didn't stand for decades without someone looking away, someone turning keys and signing forms, someone pretending. She turned her attention to the town itself. Ashmore was small but old. Generations had been born and buried there. The town square still had a cobbler's shop, a well-worn church, and a courthouse that hadn't seen a real trial in half a century. It was a place where secrets settled like dust, and questions were passed down as omens. Eleanor visited the church first. The current pastor, Reverend Stokes, was in his 60s and cautious. He spoke gently but guardedly about history. When she asked about the Mendelsons, his expression darkened. Some houses forget, others record. That one, it remembers too well. He hesitated before continuing. My father was a boy here in the 30s. He told me once about a woman who came to the church begging to speak. Florence Mendelssohn, he said she wept blood, not tears, blood. Did anyone listen? They buried it, like everything else. The Reverend reached beneath the altar and retrieved a locked box. Inside, a brittle, water-stained ledger marked donations and privileges, page after page of names, next to some small red marks. Eleanor ran her finger down the columns until one line made her stop. Charles A. Mendelssohn, 1874–1881. Donation, $2,000 privilege, immunity. Immunity from what? She asked. The Reverend wouldn't meet her eyes. Whatever the town needed to forget. Ashmore had made a choice. Whether out of fear, convenience, or greed, its elders had accepted Charles's money and looked the other way. When children vanished, explanations were quietly invented. Runaways, illness. Accidents. No one investigated, no one pressed. The town survived because it was willing to forget its own children. Back at the library, Eleanor combed through the minutes of old council meetings. One in particular, dated 1882, was written in a hurried, nervous hand. The matter of the Mendelssohn estate is hereby deemed closed. No further inquiries shall be permitted. The structure is to remain under private protection. Let the past lie dormant. Signed by 5 men. The same 5 names appeared on the donation ledger. She copied them carefully, circled each one. None had descendants living in town anymore. Their legacy had faded, except in that house. Eleanor walked the streets of Ashmore that evening, watching the faces. Older residents averted their eyes. Younger ones crossed the road. The town hadn't forgotten. It had just become skilled at silence. Back in the house, she stood in the entryway and whispered a single word. Why? The wind outside fell still. Then, from deep within the walls, the answer came. Not as a voice, but a feeling. Heavy, old, a collective breath held for too long, because silence was easier. Because remembering would mean reckoning. Eleanor knew now what she had to do. Not just uncover names, not just hear the whispers. She had to speak them out loud, in public. She had to undo the pact Ashmore had made generations ago. The names were not curses. They were testimonies. She sat by the fireplace, opened her notebook, and read each one. Slowly, clearly. Caleb, Eliza, Miriam, Thomas, Ruth, Henry, Nora, Lena. As she spoke them, the house changed. The groans turned to sighs. The cold softened. The weight of silence loosened. And when she reached the final name, the one with no year, carved deepest into the floor beneath the attic stairs, she said it loudest of all, Jacob. The floor creaked once gently, like the house nodding in thanks. Outside, the church bell rang for no reason. And the town, though it didn't yet know it, had begun to wake. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She paced the house like a steward, a caretaker, not of walls and windows, but of memory. The names had been spoken. The silence had cracked. But something remained beneath it all, something deeper, hidden not just by dust or time, but by design. The grand hall with its vaulted ceiling and ornamental trim had always felt like a facade, too pristine, too deliberate. She stared at the floor, its symmetry, the way the planks ran in perfect lines. She dropped to her knees and tapped across each board. Most echoed the same dull resistance, except one. Near the center of the room, directly beneath the chandelier, a single plank thudded differently, muted, as if hollow. She fetched her tools and worked carefully. The wood resisted more than usual. It had been sealed with layers of wax and nails, placed in awkward angles. But Eleanor kept at it. Finally, the plank splintered at the edge and lifted. The scent that rose was old, earth, copper, and mildew. She aimed her lantern into the opening and saw bone. She widened the hole, her breath caught between her ribs. The skeletal frame was curled, fetal, draped in rotted cloth and chains that had rusted into the floor. Around the neck, a tag made of brass, green with age. She lifted it slowly. E.M. Her hands shook. It was her own initials. No. No, it couldn't be. She blinked and turned it over. Esther Mendelssohn, 1884, a name she hadn't found in any record. Not in the council archives, Not in Florence's letters, not on the walls. She opened her notebook and compared it to the others. Esther was the first Mendelssohn child listed in a school ledger, but her name vanished by the next year. No obituary, no mention, not erased, hidden. Eleanor stared at the skeleton again. It was small, like a child's, but the wrists were bound too tightly for any child. The bones were delicate, but not infantile. 17, maybe 18. A girl caught between childhood and adulthood. She pulled back, sickened. This wasn't a stranger. This was family. The floor moaned beneath her as she stood. Suddenly she felt it, an overwhelming pressure. Not physical, but emotional. A weight in the air that pushed down on her shoulders made her knees tremble. She turned and saw the portraits on the far wall. One had fallen. She picked it up. It was Florence, and in her lap, a child with long dark hair, eyes wide and sad. The back of the frame bore an inscription, Esther, our quiet flame. Eleanor's breath hitched. The initials weren't a coincidence. E.M. Eleanor May Black. Was her name an accident? She thought of her mother, the silence, the fear, the refusal to speak of origins. She flipped back through the journal, her mother's journal, and found a blank page near the middle that had always been glued shut. She pried it open, written inside in faded ink. You were named for her. The one who tried to fight him. The one Florence couldn't save. She was brave. May you be too. Eleanor sat down hard, the weight of lineage crashing over her. She wasn't just investigating a house. She was walking through the remnants of her own blood. Esther had tried to resist, tried to stop what was happening. And for that she was silenced, buried beneath the place built to remember everyone else. But now she had been found. Eleanor covered the remains gently. She didn't know yet how to mourn, but she would learn. And as she stood, she whispered, I found you. The house groaned, softer this time, no longer resisting, as if it too understood. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was coming, and with it, the reckoning. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain slammed against the windows like fists. The house groaned, not from wind, but from memory. Eleanor lit her lantern and climbed to the attic, the last place she hadn't searched. The steps cried beneath her weight, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The attic was filled with forgotten trunks, old furniture draped in sheets, dust too thick to stir. She scanned every corner, looking for something that didn't belong. In the far end, beneath a rotting crib, she found it, a wooden chest with brass corners and a broken lock. Inside, linens, photographs, a locket, and beneath it all, wrapped in oilskin, a book. It was Florence's diary. Eleanor sat on the floor and opened it. The first pages were gentle, entries about flowers, about music played in the evenings, about children she called her little lights. But by page 20, the tone changed. Charles has grown distant. He speaks to the walls, he speaks to the floor, he whispers to the wood as if it were listening. Eleanor read faster. He says the house must be sealed, that it will protect the world from its own filth, but I see no salvation, only confinement. When Ruth fell ill, I begged for a doctor. He said she would transcend. I found her cold the next morning, lips blue, hands tied. I tried to leave. He locked the doors. He said the house knew my scent now, that it would never let me go. Eleanor's hands tightened around the pages. I began carving the names when I realized no one else would. Each one vanished without a trace. Caleb, Miriam, Thomas. I whispered their names at night so they wouldn't be erased. Esther was the last. She was too much like me, quiet but stubborn. She saw through him. She screamed when he chose the cellar for her. I fought him. He broke my wrist. I still remember the sound. After she was gone, the floor wouldn't stop creaking, not with footsteps, with guilt. Eleanor turned the page. There were water stains, smudged ink. I don't know what's worse, that I didn't stop him sooner, or that I stayed after I knew. I told myself I was protecting the others, that staying near them was better than leaving them alone. But now I know I was complicit. The next pages were blank, then one final entry written in hurried, unsteady hand. I think the house listens to me now, not to obey, but to remember. I hear their laughter in the floorboards, and sometimes I see them in dreams. They are not angry, just waiting. One day a girl with my name will set us free. Her name will be carved in silence but spoken with fire. Eleanor stared at the line, her throat tight. She closed the diary and held it to her chest. The attic was quiet. She stood and looked at the walls around her, wood aged by time and soaked with grief. And yet, for the first time, it felt less like a prison and more like a tomb with its door cracked open. Florence hadn't just written to confess, she'd written to guide. Eleanor descended the stairs, heart steady. The pages in her mind repeated like a mantra, the names, the failures, the hope. Down in the drawing room she placed the diary beside her notebook, beside the list of the lost. She wasn't just the one who had found them, she was the one they had waited for. And now the storm was no longer outside. It was inside her. Tomorrow she would tear up the floors, she would open the cellar, she would lift every board, speak every name, and do what Florence could not. But tonight she whispered once more, "I am here." And the house for the first time whispered back, "So are we." Eleanor rose before dawn. Ashmore slept beneath heavy clouds, its streets drenched in last night's storm. She walked slowly to the cemetery, the diary pressed against her chest like armor. Her steps led her to a section of unmarked graves, tiny forgotten plots where the soil seemed thinner, as if memory itself resisted burial. She stopped at the stone bearing a single initial, E.M. Her hands shook. It could have stood for Esther Mendelssohn. It could have stood for herself. She crouched and whispered, "I know now, I know who you were. And who I am." The revelation had settled in her bones overnight. Esther hadn't vanished. She'd been buried under silence. And somewhere in her lineage, Eleanor had emerged, not by coincidence, but by echo. After her mother's journal revealed the truth, Eleanor had sent a DNA sample to a genealogy lab months earlier. Back then it was part of a personal project. She never expected the result that arrived by mail yesterday. One Mendelssohn strand remained. Florence's blood ran through her. Eleanor Black was Florence's great-granddaughter. It explained the draw to the house, the dreams, the whisper that guided her toward each name. It explained why, among 1,000 forgotten houses, this one had found her. But the connection wasn't just biological. It was spiritual. She was the one Florence wrote about, the girl with her name, the one who would finish what she could not. Back at the house, Eleanor stood in the center of the drawing room. The floor felt softer now, almost ready to let go. She traced the cracks, the knots, the seams, each board a chapter, each name a sentence left unfinished. She found the loose plank again, the one where Esther had been buried, and removed it fully. Beneath the remains, tucked into the soil, was a medallion, bronze with a crest, M inside a sunburst, Florence's family symbol. She strung it around her neck. The house pulsed, quietly, subtly, as if recognizing its own blood. Eleanor spoke aloud. "My name is Eleanor May Black, but I carry Florence's voice. And Esther's pain." The chandelier above didn't sway, the windows didn't rattle, and yet everything in the room seemed to shift, to align. The house was listening. She returned to the fireplace and added 3 more names to her list: Esther, Florence, and finally, herself. Because to undo a curse, you have to acknowledge all its victims. That evening, she sat with Ida at the diner. The old woman looked thinner, as if the weight of the years had finally settled into her bones. Eleanor told her everything, about the medallion, the genealogy, the diary, the whisper of Florence echoing through generations. Ida didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "I thought we were all gone, that no one would ever come back." "You weren't wrong," Eleanor replied. "You were just early." She placed the diary in Ida's hands. "This belongs to both of us." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I failed my sister. I never went back." "She forgave you," Eleanor said gently. "The house already did." They sat in silence for a while, then Ida whispered, "What will you do now?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "I'll finish it. All of it." She stood to leave, but Ida stopped her. "One more thing," she said. "There's a name you haven't found yet." Eleanor turned. "Mine was never written on the floor," Ida said, "but Lena's was. If you speak hers again, say mine too." Eleanor nodded. "I will." She stepped out into the night, the medallion cool against her chest. She wasn't just the storyteller now, she was the final chapter, and by dawn, she would write the ending. Eleanor returned to Ashmore Hill with the sun barely up. Clouds pressed low, heavy and grey, but there was a calmness in the air, like the moment before a match is struck. She carried little with her: Florence's diary, the medallion, a small canister of kerosene, a box of matches, and her notebook with every name she'd found. She paused at the edge of the property, breathing in the scent of wet earth and wild grass. The house watched her. For the first time, she felt no fear. The walls recognized her. The weight of history was ready to be lifted. Eleanor stepped inside. The silence had changed. It was no longer oppressive, but expectant. She moved from room to room, touching floorboards, brushing fingers across portraits, pausing in the nursery to whisper Lena's and Ida's names together. The air vibrated, the wood hummed in response. Down in the cellar, the darkness waited. She descended, lantern in one hand, the other tracing the stone walls. It was cold, far colder than any cellar should be in summer. She found the furnace, ancient, rusted, filled with ashes decades old. Eleanor placed the diary atop the ashes. She poured kerosene slowly, methodically, making sure it soaked the old wood and the diary's battered cover. Each drop seemed to echo, as if the house itself was listening to every action. She opened her notebook and read the names aloud, voice steady and clear, one by one. Caleb. Eliza. Miriam, Thomas, Ruth, Henry, Nora, Lena, Jacob, Esther, Florence, and finally her own Eleanor. Each name spoken seemed to peel back a layer of darkness, to loosen the chains wound around the house's memory. Eleanor struck a match. For a moment she hesitated, her mind filled with images of all who had suffered here. Children's laughter, muffled cries, Florence's trembling hands, Ida's broken promise. Then she dropped the match into the furnace. Flames roared up, hungry and bright, devouring the paper, licking the wood, crackling with the sound of 100 years' regret. The heat rose instantly, sweat beading on her forehead as she stepped back. She whispered a prayer, not for herself but for all of them. At first, the fire burned only in the furnace, but as the heat built, smoke curled around the cellar, searching for cracks, rising through the floorboards. The house responded, not with anger but with a deep, shuddering sigh. The groans became voices, hundreds at once, whispering, singing, sobbing, laughing. She could feel them swirling around her, desperate to be free, desperate to be heard. The flames raced up the walls, hungrily devouring secrets. Paintings curled and blackened. Names burned themselves into memory one final time. Eleanor shouted them again, her voice strong, unyielding. The house shook. Beams snapped overhead. Glass shattered. The air filled with the smell of old paper, lavender, blood and hope. She clung to the medallion, clutching it like a lifeline, whispering Florence's words over and over. "I loved them, even as I failed them. Know that I tried." Suddenly a gust of wind swept through the cellar, impossible, wild and warm. It whipped the flames higher, sucking every hidden sorrow into the fire. The voices crescendoed, a chorus of gratitude and grief. And then, silence. Eleanor stood alone in the flickering light. The last pages of the diary burned to ash. The house had stopped fighting. Its foundation trembled, weakened, ready to fall. She turned for the stairs, her heart pounding, smoke blurring her vision. But behind her, just before she climbed out, a single voice, gentle, unmistakable, and so familiar, spoke from the fire. "Thank you." She froze, tears streaming down her face. Then, with one last look, she fled up the stairs as the house began to collapse. Eleanor burst from the cellar, smoke billowing behind her as the first flames licked the walls. She staggered into the main hall, coughing, vision blurred by heat and tears. Every floorboard trembled underfoot, every painting shimmered as if faces inside were awakening for the last time. She knew she couldn't leave yet, not until she finished what she'd started. She ran to the center of the hall, clutching the medallion, and shouted the names one final time. Each syllable was a key turning, a lock opening. The house shook in answer, walls vibrating with voices layered atop one another. Some cried, some sang, some simply breathed. A cold wind swept through the hallway, impossible with fire raging, but unmistakably real. The flames bent and parted, swirling in patterns Eleanor didn't understand, but somehow trusted. The smoke danced, forming fleeting silhouettes, small hands waving, eyes wide with hope. She watched as the outlines of children emerged from the walls, not in agony, but in relief. Their faces softened as their names echoed through the burning air. Caleb, Eliza, Miriam, Thomas, Ruth, Henry, Nora, Lena, Jacob, Esther, Florence. They circled her, laughter rising like music, the bitterness of memory replaced with lightness, forgiveness. Eleanor wept as she felt the warmth of their gratitude, the peace that came at last. Then Florence appeared. Not as a ghost, but as a vision, whole, radiant, her eyes bright with pride and sorrow. She knelt beside Eleanor and pressed a hand to her cheek. "You finished it, my darling." "You remembered?" Eleanor nodded, overcome by a love so fierce it burned hotter than the fire. Florence smiled. "It's time to let go." The house groaned again, beams cracking, glass exploding in every room. But in the midst of destruction, there was release. The weight that had held Ashmore silent for generations lifted. The curse unraveled, thread by thread, until only memory remained, sharp but finally at rest. Eleanor felt herself being pulled backward, as if the house itself was urging her to run. She staggered to the door, looking over her shoulder one last time. Every spirit, every child, every name she had spoken stood together, their faces illuminated by flame and forgiveness. Florence lifted a hand in farewell. As Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the front hall collapsed in a burst of orange and gold. The house, once a monument to secrets and sorrow, became a pyre, sending ashes and old stories into the sky. The storm had passed. The rain began to fall, hissing against the flames, helping to finish what Eleanor had begun. In the yard, she collapsed to her knees, exhausted but free. She looked up as dawn broke over Ashmore. The sky glowed lavender and blue. Birds began to sing. A gentle warmth spread through her chest, the first peace she had felt since arriving. Ida found her there an hour later, draping a blanket over her shoulders. They sat together in silence, watching as the last of the Mendelssohn house smoldered to cinders. Ashmore's air felt lighter, its silence clean. Eleanor pressed the medallion into Ida's palm. "We're both free now," she whispered. Ida nodded, tears glimmering. "So are they." As the smoke faded, Eleanor closed her eyes. She could still hear the laughter, the gratitude, the voices of those who'd waited so long. They were gone, but they were not lost. Their names had been released, carried on the wind, written not just on floorboards, but on hearts willing to remember. And with the house finally gone, Ashmore could begin again. Ashmore changed after the fire. Where the Mendelssohn house once brooded atop the hill, wildflowers slowly began to grow. Locals avoided the ruins at first, fearful the silence might still linger. But over weeks and months, the air lightened, and the people of Ashmore found themselves breathing easier, as if the weight they'd never named had finally lifted from their chests. Eleanor watched as grass crept over charred earth, and robins built nests in the remnants of the garden. She walked the perimeter each morning, whispering a quiet greeting to every soul she'd set free. Sometimes she felt the brush of a breeze against her arm, soft, playful, almost childlike. The townsfolk noticed changes in themselves too. Elderly residents who had once shunned each other in fear and shame began gathering in the square to share coffee and stories. For the first time in years, laughter echoed along Main Street. The church bells rang for weddings and birthdays, not just funerals. Ida, her strength returned, began teaching again, knitting and baking for children at the parish hall. She spoke to them of kindness and of the courage it takes to break a silence. No one asked her about the house, no one needed to. Eleanor wrote her story, not as an exposé, but as a testament. She left out the worst of the horrors and the names of the living, but she made sure every lost child had their name written plainly in ink. Her manuscript found a home in the town library, shelved beneath the window where sunlight poured in each afternoon. One day the mayor approached her. "Ashmore owes you a debt," he said. Eleanor shook her head. "You owe it to yourselves." "I just listened." He nodded. "Some debts are paid with memory." Years passed. The hill bloomed wild with lupine and goldenrod. All that remained of the Mendelssohn legacy was a small stone marker, simple and unadorned, at the edge of the field. Here the names were spoken, here the silence ended. Eleanor moved on, but never far. Each summer, she returned to Ashmore and sat beneath the lone birch tree overlooking the old estate, remembering. She did not see ghosts, but sometimes, as dusk settled over the valley, she thought she heard a chorus of laughter, a whisper of gratitude drifting on the wind. In the end, she knew the truth was not in the horror, but in the healing. She had walked through history's shadows and brought names back into the light, and as long as even one person remembered them, they were never truly gone. Before we part ways, if you followed this journey, if these voices have moved you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Every story you support helps us uncover new truths, honor the forgotten, and ensure no voice is lost to silence. Ashmore's story doesn't end here. There are countless other secrets buried in forgotten places, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Don't let the story fade. Subscribe, share, and keep the memories alive. And if you want to continue exploring the untold stories that shape our world, click on the video suggested on your screen right now. There's another haunting American secret waiting just for you. Thank you for joining me, for bearing witness, and for believing that even the quietest names deserve to be heard. Ashmore is at peace, and somewhere beneath a sky washed clean by fire and rain, the children play at last, free, remembered, and forever unforgotten.